Hello, everybody. Today we welcome on Dr. David Rosensweet. I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Rosensweet. He's got quite the reputation in the hormone world. He is a functional medicine practitioner and he graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School in 1968, and he's been in practice pretty much since then, since 1971. And he has offices across America, or the States as you guys call it. And then he was also involved in the very first nurse practitioner training program in the USA as well. To say Dr. Rosensweet is a wealth of knowledge is an understatement, but his more specific focus is teaching health professionals about the treatment of women in perimenopause with bioidentical hormones, which is why you're here today, Dr. Rosensweet. So thank you.
Honored to be here, Chemaine.
Thank you. So, really, you started your medical journey in 1968, but at what stage did you get involved in hormones?
Well, I was in practice in Santa Fe in 1993, and a patient that I knew really well, she was brilliant. She was in her 40s. She had retired. Think about that, in her 40s.
For her?
She came storming into my office one morning before office hours as I was doing paperwork, and she just said, "You got to help me. I'm telling you, I'm going crazy.
Mm,
I mean it."
yeah.
And, I feel like all of our lives, and certainly my medical practice, have been divinely guided. I had just been speaking to a hormonal expert on progesterone, and I gave her some progesterone. And 3 weeks later, I got a letter from her saying, "I can't believe this stuff. I'm totally myself again."
Yeah.
And that was so impressive to me. But I didn't really control my practice. Before I knew it, I was seeing a lot of women in perimenopause and menopause too. It's definitely assisting women in menopause. And I was very interested in it. I love biochemistry, I love hormones, and at a certain point, I just decided to specialize in it because it was big. It was a big field. There was a lot of complexity to it, and it was a natural fit. So here I am, 33 years later, just
Still going strong.
still going strong.
Well, it was clearly your calling, and you wouldn't be good at it if you didn't love it. That's a key factor. And you also just so our listeners can hear, you also do help men in andropause as well. So it's
Definitely,
not
yeah,
just the perimenopause and the menopause aspect.
that for sure, yeah.
So, um, as we transition through this call, I kind of want to start it with the basics, which most people don't know. What is the difference between what we hear of from our conventional medicine, hormone replacement therapy, and the bioidentical side? What is the difference in both of those?
Well, to back up a little bit, the whole medical field around hormones is so different
Mhm.
than everything else in medicine. In the 90s and the 2000s, the whole field of medicine was differentiating into specialties. Physicians and associated scientists were focusing in on one thing to get great at one thing because the whole thing has gotten too big.
Yeah.
And they developed board certification, they developed standards of care, and they're almost of one voice about what's right. And they're right because they figured it out. They've been at it so long, elements of it. But this didn't happen in menopause. In menopause, this insane thing happened where in 2002, even though, for example, in the USA, there was 18 million American women on hormones,
Well,
40% of all those in menopause. This study comes out that's falsely reported, the opposite of what's true. It scared women all over the world and all over the USA and Canada into that they were at increased risk for hormones,
mhm.
for cancer if they took hormones. So the whole field got stunted. So providers shied away from it, and the whole field did not develop. And if you look deeply into the study, well, I was already practicing for 10 years at that time. I got concerned when I originally read the study, but then I went, wait a minute, there's no increased risk reported out of this study. Not at all. How did this happen?
Yeah.
And I did not get scared away from it. I did some extensive research into it, and I just carried on. And the whole field became the Wild West. As women went off of hormones, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
The whole 18 million American women in the USA
Yeah.
dropped to less than 2 million. And women were desperate because the symptoms of perimenopause and menopause in 80% of all women are so devastating, so it's life-stopping,
Yeah.
which that's a great thing. I'll get back to that. That's a great thing. I'm saying
Yeah.
that's a great thing, right?
It's so fun.
Let me get back to that. Um, well, women were reaching out. I need help. This is too much. And simultaneous, I had already been into it for 10 years. There were pioneers in the world of menopausal medicine. But in the 1980s, a physician and a pharmacist simultaneously at different parts of the country, they said, why should we be giving women hormones that are derived from horse urine?
Yeah.
Isn't there pure molecules out there?
Which is where the study was based, was not the pure bioidentical hormones.
Correct. It was based on Premarin and Prempro, hormones derived from pregnant horses.
Mm.
And but even that study was falsely reported. There is no increased risk even with Premarin and Prempro. I mean, I've never written a prescription for Premarin,
Yeah.
but it did a lot of women a lot of good.
Yeah.
And but the pioneers thought we know that pure molecularly identical bioidentical hormones are available because they've been developing them for the birth control pill.
Mhm.
That's what's in the pill, almost bioidentical. And so one of the physicians reached out to his compounding pharmacist and said, "Go find this stuff, will you? And let's give women the pure stuff, the same thing that's coming out of their ovary."
Yeah.
And then there was a pharmacist simultaneously in Texas who had the same idea. He said, Hey, I can get my hands on the pure stuff." And that's where bioidentical was really born. Same molecules comes out of the ovary. And those of us, many of us said, let's see, horse urine or pure molecule. I think I'm going for the pure molecule. It's coming out of plants,
Yeah.
really, originally. And so that whole field developed. And by the time women got desperate, they started reaching out all over. And there was a certain number of healthcare providers, physicians that were very interested in the bioidentical. And so by 2016, when they restudied this, there were 6 million women in the USA, not 18 million.
Mm.
6 million women were on hormones, and half of them were on compounded bioidentical hormones
Uh-huh.
because that's what they had chosen.
Yeah.
And so that's where they were born, and that's how they grew up. And that's the story of bioidenticals. But why did I say I made this strange comment? If I may divert, I said, women get shaken up. 80% of women get such life-stopping symptoms
Mhm.
in midlife. And I said, oh, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And here's why. Because the hormones are so powerful that the absence of the hormones are really a problem.
Yeah.
And 80% of the women feel that problem. They can't sleep, their mood's all over the place, and their libido drops, their vaginas get into atrophy. They're losing bones and they don't know it. They're losing muscles and they don't know it. The libido, it's all brain fog. It's lots of life-stopping symptoms.
The night
The
sweat,
advantage of, pardon,
the
night
night
sweats,
sweats.
but yeah, can't sleep. Waking up in the middle of the night, can't go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Why I say that this turns out to be a good thing is that it really motivates women.
Yeah.
They go, hey, wait a minute. I got to figure out what's happening here.
Yeah.
And that's the benefit of it. And it's a funny way to put it because 20% of the women don't have symptoms and they
Mhm.
don't get motivated.
Yeah.
But the same deep losses are occurring in them.
Yeah.
They're losing bone, they don't know it. They're losing muscle, they don't know it. And they're looking around and going, "What's the big problem with menopause? I had an easy menopause." But they're the ones that are usually the ones who, in the long run, have the most trouble.
I was saying
Whereas the other women, they get motivated. They go, "Hey, I got to do something about this."
yeah, because the signals are clear. I
Yes,
was saying
exactly.
to a client earlier who thinks she's had a pretty easy go so far, and I was like, well, that's not uncommon. A lot of women are entering perimenopause from the age of 35, and they are not having extreme symptoms. But then one day they wake up in their mid 40s and it hits them like a ton of bricks. And all of a sudden, where did this come from? So it is the case where the lucky few escape the symptoms, but some women who think they're not getting symptoms, and then it just hits them out of nowhere and they don't know what to do.
And it makes sense because young women and young men, our hormone levels, they're the highest they ever get in about the age of 20, plus or minus a couple of years. And then they decline, and they never stop declining. But at a certain point, when you use that much biochemical power, you feel it.
Do you think the amount of stress that someone has in their life influences the speed at which they
I
decline?
do. I do. I mean, when we think of stress, there's a fight or flight biology that goes on. The vanguard of that biology is adrenaline and cortisol,
Yeah.
adrenal hormones.
Oh,
But
yeah.
what many people don't realize is that what's also recruited is any power biochemicals that are around. And so women recruit estrogen and testosterone big time.
Hmm.
That's why a lot of women Olympic athletes, their training programs are so severe, they're so stressful that you look at that screen and they're performing great, but they're not menstruating.
Yeah.
They've diverted their estrogen down the stress pathway. That's the most extreme example of it. Yes, I do. I think that stress is part of what leads to that decline, but everyone declines.
I've seen
But
it in clients where they've gone through very stressful events, and then 2 or 3 months later, they'll completely miss a period. It just won't show up. And myself, if I've gone through a stressful time, it'll still show up, but it'll be barely present. It'll be, as Carol puts it, a breakthrough bleed. I haven't ovulated because I was too stressed that month. And I really see in my clients as well that the women who have had a lot of stress across their life and going into perimenopause, their symptoms are a lot worse than the women who have not experienced that much stress. So clearly, stress is a predictor of how severe your symptoms are going to be.
yeah, and as a side note, and I know that I don't believe this is where you were heading, it's not so much the stress, it's we haven't been brought up with a lot of skills to deal with the emotions and consciousness aspect and life aspects of the stress that appears in our life.
Mhm.
So we consistently trigger the fight or flight biology. And so it runs silent and runs deep as to the moral of the story is, gee, I wish we were all taught at the age of 5. Now, this is how you deal when you're afraid. And this is a very effective tool for when you're angry. And this is, without that knowledge and those skills, that's what really amplifies the declines you're pointing towards.
Yeah, I think to what you're saying, a lot of us don't know how to deal. We're running around like headless chickens, and we're just in that survive mode all the time, just trying to survive the day, hope for the best. Hopefully, nobody dies along the way, and we don't really have that skill set to manage everything.
Moral of the story, and it sure happened to me when I was in my early 30s. Go acquire that skill set around the emotions and the mind. Have it be one of the major things that people care about and are committed to, because it can make such a difference in becoming the full miraculous humans that we are, rather than being lost in the swirl of the stress that distracts us from fun and happiness and love.
Yeah. Still
Peace.
To this day, although practitioners speak about stress a lot, I still think people under acknowledge it or underestimate the power it has on our lives.
So if you want sometime in this podcast, I can share a tool around stress.
I totally go for it now while we're here.
Well, when you look at stress, there's a couple elements. There's what's happening externally,
Yeah.
and and then there's what's happening internally. And how well we do externally is going to relate to how skilled we are internally. So one of the internal skills needed is to understand and have skills to deal with what's happening to us internally. And if you examine under the microscope of what's going on in any stressful situation, there's going to be emotions and thoughts and a whole bunch of biology.
Mhm.
But the key driving factor is the uncomfortable feelings. So we're not very skilled when uncomfortable feelings arise, fear or shame or guilt. So the skill set required is get really skillful at identifying uncomfortable feelings and do the right thing with them. Because if you have uncomfortable feelings and you get real angry, it isn't going to help you to duke it out with the political system or a spouse or someone in your relationship, but it doesn't work in case you haven't discovered that yet.
Yeah,
Trying to get someone else to change or modify their behavior doesn't work, and it should.
I know it doesn't.
Many
So,
of us have figured that out. So let's say that the elephant in the room is it looks like an emotional entanglement with a friend or a partner.
mm,
But let's take out what's happening inside of me. Whole bunch of emotions, whole bunch of thoughts. So the skill that's needed is to do well with those emotions. Where'd they come from? Lifetimes and lifetimes of not successful healing of our own emotions. So we all arrive at Earth as these wonderful, amazing, miraculous human beings with so many qualities, including the ability to love. But we also come with unfinished emotional business that gets amplified in our childhood, and we show up as adults with a whole emotional undercurrent of fear and sadness and anger and shame and guilt and emptiness and loneliness and meaninglessness and powerlessness. So the moral of the story is get really good at those emotions when they come up. So let's say you're in an entanglement with a partner, as an example. The best thing in the world you can do is pause and say, what's going on with me?
so facing the hard truth,
Facing,
they say.
facing. And what facing means is you become aware of the hard truth of what's going on in me. And what you'll always discover is something like fear or sadness or anger or shame or guilt, or that list I rattled off.
Yeah.
So the only thing that works, the only thing that ever works with your own internal suffering is an act of love, an act of unconditional love. And the mechanics of that unconditional love is recognizing what you're feeling it. There's the heavy lifting.
Mhm.
Feeling it, feeling it, feeling it, and breathing and feeling. And if you stay conscious of it in a feeling way, you're feeling, feeling, feeling. You can do that silently. You don't have to tell your partner, give me a moment here, I got to feel. No, you don't have to do that. You can say, let me pause for a moment. I want to take care of myself. Then we'll get back to our conversation.
Mhm. Let me just step out of
And
the
you're,
room for a minute.
that's right. And you're feeling and feeling and feeling. And the magic is acceptance. And what acceptance is you allow the feelings to be what they actually are. You don't do a process to get rid of them. You don't do a process to overcome them. You breathe and feel, you become the big tent, you become the mother or the father for your own self who's in pain, who's in emotional pain. And you just breathe and feel. Breathe and feel. you're doing something called acceptance. You're allowing what's going on in your own self to be what it is with
Yeah.
no agenda. You're accepting. You're
Yeah.
becoming a whole person. You're including the parts of yourself that are hurting. And if you do that, you'll experience some magic. Sooner or later, you'll feel peace.
It sounds scary to be in that moment and to face the fear and the upset and the rage. And that's why I think a
Want
lot
to do it right now?
of no,
We
but
could
that's
do a podcast at another time. How's that for a wild guess?
absolutely because I've been in these positions and over the years I'm slowly getting better, but it is scary because you almost feel out of control of these emotions because you haven't learned that skill set. So to
Precisely.
slow down and breathe and face them and accept what's happening, like you said, and I hadn't thought of it this way before, it is embracing what it is to be human, to feel everything, not just joy and laughter all the time, but the bad stuff as well as part of being human.
And it's healing.
Yeah.
And it's an act of taking personal responsibility for my own internal pain. And then you don't get entangled with someone else. And
Yeah.
it's not the communists, and it's not the Russians, and it's not the government, and it's
Well, it's so easy
not
to
my
blame other
partner.
people, though.
It's, pardon?
It's so easy to blame other people, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's a natural but dysfunctional. I don't want to feel it. It must be them.
Hmm.
But
Oh,
it's
yeah.
wrong. It's a wrong assessment. It ain't them.
Yeah. That's an aspect, I suppose, of narcissism that we all have on some level where we want to point the finger at someone else and it's not me, it's you. Especially during perimenopause when the rage can be extra high. Everyone is the problem. I'm not the problem. So could we, if you don't mind, jump into that right now and list some of the symptoms for my listeners, followers, of what to expect during perimenopause. What are some of the symptoms that women will experience, even just the main ones that are more common in your practice?
Sure. Well, as estrogen declines, it's stressful. Estrogen is so powerful and it's in every cell, the receptors are in every cell tissue of the body. So when the mind doesn't get enough estrogen, the thinking gets a little foggy. When the emotions don't have enough estrogen and they don't have enough progesterone, they don't have enough testosterone, you
Mhm.
can get out of the blue anxiety because the great calmer progesterone's not there. So when the great calmer is not there, you get uneasy, you get anxiety.
Mhm.
And you start getting disturbances in your sleep because you need the great calmer progesterone to sleep well. Plus, once the estrogen starts declining, it's really stressful to a woman.
Yeah.
So she triggers the stress response. So when it happens in the middle of the day, it triggers a heat phenomena called hot flashes, which are tolerable. That's not the big deal. But when they happen in the middle of the night,
Oh, there.
wake they wake women up, and because it's stressful, there's a lot of adrenaline that comes out, and the woman's awake with a racing, active mind. When she was 20, her liver would demobilize that adrenaline really quickly,
Mm.
and she'd go back to sleep. But when she's midlife and her liver isn't functioning at a 20-year-old level, it takes a while to get that adrenaline to metabolize off, and she stays awake, lying in bed, thinking about this, that, and everything because she's
So
got all these.
can I hold you on this point right now before we go through the rest of the symptoms? Because night sweats are the bane of my life for many reasons. Um, I've certainly just started experiencing in the last 2 months, but it's only by my cycle as my hormones drop. But stress is a huge factor. You know, this time of the year is very busy for health practitioners, but a lot of my clients, a lot of issues. So, what you said there, there's two considerations I have. So, one, liver health and function is important when considering night sweats and the ability to metabolize and break down the adrenaline. So that is something that we don't hear people talk about a lot when it comes to night sweats. We're always looking at the hormones and the adrenaline, but the adrenaline more so in the case of blood sugar and insulin resistance as well. What do you think that plays in the area of night sweats and, of course, liver highly implicated in insulin resistance?
Well, the elephant in the room is the hot flash, the night sweats, and waking up. And the most fantastic way to deal with that on one level is to restore or replenish estrogen to adequate levels. Yes, the liver counts, but that's not going to solve it. The estrogen must be replenished
Because that
to
was
adequate
another
levels.
question. I'm sorry, that was
The
another
estrogen
question.
must be replenished.
So then is it because you hear different practitioners saying different things? Carol Peterson, for example, believes the night sweats are easily fixed by increasing progesterone doses. Dr. Michael Platt, one of my mentors, he says it as well. And I've heard you in other conversations say progesterone as well, but I feel it's different from woman to woman, but what do you think the key hormone is in night sweats? Is it the estrogen or is it the progesterone?
Well, I have had a different experience in my practice. I was born and bred on progesterone.
Hmm.
I knew Dr. John Lee, and he was promoting that give a woman progesterone. And there's a lot of sense behind that because that's one of the first things to go.
Yeah.
But we always, 100% of the time, 100% give woman progesterone.
Hmm.
But the more the estrogen declines, I find sooner or later, usually sooner, it's imperative to address everything that's happened to a woman. Her progesterone has declined. Her estrogen has declined. Her testosterone has declined. We want to address all the biggies, and those three are the biggest.
Yeah.
So I was unsuccessful in alleviating night sweats. In perimenopause, it's easier to accomplish that with progesterone. And there's a certain number of women in the early perimenopause that progesterone, because of a couple effects that it has, including enhancing estrogen's effect in estrogen's own receptor sites, the progesterone will be sufficient for a while, for a brief while. I find, let's get down to business here, every woman, I mean every woman, and every man's testosterone is doing this.
Mm. Yeah.
Every woman and man, as we lose these power biochemicals, if we want to live well, we replenish them all.
Mm.
And then the art is how much of each and individualizing and personalizing every prescription. But to leave out estrogen is such a mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah.
We want to consider what's going on in the woman.
Hmm.
Well, it's not just her progesterone that's declined. Her estrogen has declined, and so is her testosterone.
Yeah.
So we figure out each woman. And we do a very simple method. We replenish all three. We start at lowish doses and we gradually increase those doses. And when a woman says, wow, I'm not waking up at night, okay, we know we're getting in the territory. And all of your listeners can have a free copy of my book in which I describe this in great detail. So they can link into your website or to your podcast and
Fantastic.
and I describe this in great detail, but my own opinion, and I'm very opinionated, is individualize each woman. And what you're going to find is women are needing all of the powerful ovarian hormones. Men need the testicular hormones. No difference there.
Before we go back to the symptoms, I'm just curious if you had a woman experiencing night sweats, but she was very muscular and didn't seem to have an issue increasing muscles or strength, would you leave out the testosterone then and just focus on progesterone and potentially estrogen if she needed it?
Close. Um, there are a certain number of women that go into the perimenopause, and although their estrogen has declined way too much and their progesterone has declined too much, their testosterone is sustaining reasonably.
Mm,
It has declined, but if you give those women testosterone, they're liable to experience a testosterone excess. They'll get pimples, oily skin, irritable.
mm. Yeah.
I used to find that quite commonly. Our original method included replenishing right out of the gate biased and progesterone, estrogen plus progesterone. And we wouldn't address testosterone until a woman had figured out biased and progesterone.
Mm,
Methods changed because, for reasons that are probably explainable, more and more women are entering the perimenopause with low testosterone. So you described a woman who may not
mm,
yet have her testosterone low. She's muscular, her libido is strong, she squats with ease,
mhm.
her drive, her motivation, her decision-making abilities are stay strong. That still does happen, but I find it less and less and less. So our general method is once the hormones start declining, replace all of them, but you're making up a very important exception, not in everybody.
Oh, it's very uncommon. It's the minority of the population, where that would be a
But it
circle.
does happen. You are pointing out something that does need to be respected.
Yeah,
Those
well,
we learn about them. We give out an extensive questionnaire, and there's about 20 questions on testosterone deficiency. And we can look at those answers and go, she's fine, or that's pretty rare.
yeah.
Or we go, look at that. She's already got major symptoms of declining testosterone. Let's start with that as well.
Yeah, interesting, really interesting. And if I'm honest, that was just a selfish question on my part. I'm quite muscular, strong, but I've been increasing over the last few weeks. Like it's easy for me, and my motivation is high, my drive is high. So although I'm still under my 40s, I think I can't see testosterone being a huge problem for me, but we'll see. You never know.
I'm not trying to put out a medical curse, but because I've tested so many women, by 3 years with no period, every woman needs testosterone,
Yeah, I'm
or
not really
99,
off.
99% do. Very rare by 3 years. But nowadays, boy, we're looking at it right in the perimenopause.
Yeah. So let's go back to some of them perimenopause symptoms, if you don't mind. I know we got a bit sidetracked there. So we've covered the night sweats, the hot flashes. What else can women expect? We've got memory loss, poor memory recall. Where's my keys? All
Well,
that.
another key is if a woman is having penetrative intercourse and she's starting to need lubrication, external lubrication, that's a sign that she's losing vaginal health. And that is a powerful indicator because estrogen is so needed for the health of the vagina that that moment where she goes, wow, I'm a little dry or that hurt a little bit. Well, maybe I'll just do some coconut oil here or something. That is very telling. Her estrogen levels have been low for a while. And it's one of the most important indicators because sooner or later, every woman loses the health of that vagina. And so we want to pay a lot of attention to that too. So on our questionnaire, for example, we ask specific questions about that. Pain on intercourse. Did you need a lube 10 years ago? Oh, no, no. Do you need a lube now? Yes, I do. Okay. The estrogen has declined, and this is a sure thing that you want to replenish that.
Yeah. So that's primarily estrogen that you would look
Yeah,
at.
primarily.
Uh, so what about the weight gain aspect of it, which is a huge problem, especially that shift of losing the butt and gaining a belly?
Yeah. Well, now we get into a broader field here because it's been midlife and there's a lot of water under the bridge here. And you brought it up earlier. You brought up the issue of insulin resistance.
Mm,
And, the loss of the hormones is not the only thing that's happened to people. And yes, the hormones play a role there. And for metabolic health, we do need those hormones. But then there's a whole other issue. it's not only the ovary that's been declining. For a lot of women, maybe two-thirds of women, the thyroid has been declining too. This determines rate of metabolism, rate at what you burn. You oxidize food for energy. And when thyroid declines, you're eating the same amount, but a lot of it is not getting burned off.
Yeah.
So we pay a lot of attention to thyroid in any perimenopausal woman.
Mhm.
And then you brought up I'm repeating myself, but you brought up another elephant in the room. If someone has been abusive through their diet to this very important hormone called insulin, and it's just been eating too much carbohydrates and really putting a strain on the glucose regulating mechanism that
Mhm.
involves insulin, it takes years to do it. But once you start doing that, you're building a recipe for weight gain. And I cover that in a chapter in my book because the subject you're bringing up is so important. And how do you address that? It's not only hormones, it's not only thyroid, it's you got to really figure out nutrition and you got to really figure out exercise.
Oh, it's
Because with
so
our
vital.
sedentary life, I mean, when we were hunter and gatherers, the issue wasn't insulin resistance, it wasn't overeating or eating processed foods, it was getting enough food. And these were thin people. And if you look at the third world, these are thin people mostly. If they're so you gotta look into that whole subject of insulin resistance big time, which takes you into the world of nutrition and takes you into the world of exercise.
Mhm. I heard you mention, just based on the ancestral reference there, I heard you mention in another conversation, and the whole organic topic is a very hot topic, but you mentioned our ancestors, they only ate, everything was organic. It was only organic because there was no alternative back then. Everything was just organic. And a lot of people don't consider the direct influence these pesticides and herbicides and byproducts and runoff has on the endocrine system.
Yes, it does. I mean, you're naming another issue that, but it's so important that the agricultural methods started changing in the 1940s and 50s, and they got into this weird method of farming. It was an unhealthy method of farming. They took the nitrates that were used in producing gunpowder and ammunition, and they had a big surplus of it at the end of World War II. And they had this idea of let's put it on the soil. Maybe the things will grow faster. And they did. So agribusiness added nitrates to the soil, and the plants did grow faster. But that's not all plants need. They need a heck of a lot more nutrients than that. So they got unhealthy. So they got prey to weeds, and they got prey to insects. So then these big agricultural enterprises, they have to deal with an excess insect and weed problem. So what their solution was, well, let's poison them. Well, how much poison does it take to knock off a roach or an ant or some other insect?
Yeah.
Fairy dust doesn't do it. You got to use really strong chemicals. So they had the chemicals. They were left over from the war too, these petrochemicals, and they could spray them on the plants and kill them. Well, human beings didn't put together, if we spray this stuff and we're killing insects and herbs, do you think this has any harmful effect on the agricultural workers or on the food?
Mhm.
Well, it does, and you named it. It's had widespread deleterious effects. And one of the things that these petrochemicals do in the female body is they disrupt the hormones. Of all things they could be attracted to in the female body, they're attracted to hormone receptor sites.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of grief there.
Mhm.
A lot of women with PMS, endometriosis. Part of the reason that it's become such so epidemic is the poisoning of our planet. And the remedy is not that complex. You seek out farmers markets. You seek out farmers who don't want to use this crap.
Yeah.
They like the old-fashioned farming methods, and they're organic. That's what organic is. Like you said,
Just
the earth has only been organic until this crazy agribusiness started happening.
Mhm,
So you go back and you find that food. And the supermarkets, the special health food markets, are carrying organic food.
mhm,
And you get back to eating like our ancestors did, and you eliminate all bottles and boxes and cans because they're loaded with this stuff.
mhm.
And you get back to do what your grandmother did. She didn't have a choice. She went to market and she could only find organic vegetables. That's all your grandparents ate.
Yeah.
My grandparents.
Yeah.
That's what was there
They did.
prior to World War II.
Mhm.
So this organic is not this mystery name, but you must make that choice because that's one of the main ways you're getting these toxic chemicals that are disrupting you is through the food supply. It's also coming in through the water. It's also in the air.
Yeah.
It's also in your household stuff, your cleansers and your perfumes and the crazy stuff people add to their laundry. So you want to live cheaper? Don't buy any of this stuff.
Yeah.
What do we use? We use a very pure laundry soap and dish soap.
Yeah, I use borax in my laundry.
Yeah, beautiful.
So,
And we use a simple cleanser, and that's about it, or vinegar.
yeah.
So you save a bunch of money. You don't spray all this Glade and crap in your hair.
Um,
So you live cheaper and you live cleaner.
yeah. So you mentioned there that you mentioned in passing these chemicals being endocrine disruptors, we see higher instances of endometriosis and PCOS. So are you saying that they're more estrogenic in their activity?
A lot of them are estrogenic in their activity.
Mhm. Which is my next question then. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you don't prescribe estrogen alone. Why is that?
Well, estrogen is actually the name of a family. And what's in the estrogen family, is three different main estrogens.
Mhm.
The one that most women think of or providers think of when they think of estrogen, they think of the most potent estrogen that comes out of the ovary called estradiol.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing that comes out of the ovary. Also, a hormone, whoops, look at that.
We're having a party.
There's another hormone that comes out of the ovary. It's called estrone. It's not as strong as estradiol. It's about 80% as strong. And there's a third one called estriol.
Hmm.
And in a natural, I'm going to jump into the weeds here. You yank me out of there, Chemaine, if it's too challenging there. But I
No.
think it's a very important topic. That's why I'm really eager to address it.
Well, no, go for it because I have a question because I know what you're going to say and I have a question for it.
All right. So in every young woman's normal cycle, she puts out in the beginning of that cycle primarily estradiol. And estradiol is proliferative. It causes the formation, it promotes the formation of cells to line her uterus
Mhm,
to form a real rich acceptance bed for a possible fertilized egg. That's estrogen driven.
mhm.
And it's proliferative other places too. It's proliferative in a woman's breast. I mean, it's you want to believe in the divine, study the woman's menstrual cycle. A wo- each cycle, a woman's also preparing for breastfeeding, as if she's going to get pregnant, and the preparation begins each cycle. So many women feel this. They feel their breasts get fuller. Well, some of that fullness is new cells that have developed by cellular mitosis. They're proliferating. Breast glandular tissue is proliferating also at the same time. If she does not get pregnant, the whole second half of the cycle becomes deproliferative, ending in the shedding of the uterine lining.
Yeah.
These cells disappear. And they disappear in the breast as well by a process called apoptosis. So the breasts get less full every single cycle. Proliferation, deproliferation. What was discovered in the late 90s is that the whole proliferative cycle is under the inspiration of an estrogen receptor site called estrogen receptor site alpha. And the main stimulant of estrogen receptor site alpha is estradiol, proliferative. But if there's going to be deproliferation, that's under the auspices of estrogen receptor site beta. And the main stimulant of estrogen receptor site beta is estriol.
That was my question. Yeah.
There's more estriol than there is estradiol. Certainly, nature must have had some function for it. Our whole strategy for decades and decades is just copy nature. Nature's figured this out, nature, so to speak.
Mhm.
So the use of biest that contain estradiol plus estriol began in the 1980s by a dear pioneer. I get tears in my eyes when I think of this doctor's contribution, Dr. Jonathan Wright. He said, why don't we just copy nature? Let's just do what a woman does
It makes
rather than
sense.
invent a new thing there. Radical thinking, right? And so he brought forth this combination of estrogens, treat with estrogen plus estriol, estradiol plus estriol, biased, it's named. And it's produced by compounding pharmacies. In fact, that's the only place you can get it. We're very, very strong proponents of that. He actually came up with that idea because there was an oncologist, a medical doctor at the University of Nebraska in the 1960s that had this idea to study the urine of women who were young and healthy, and also the urine of women who had breast cancer. And what he found was a lot less estrol in the women who had breast cancer. The estrogen receptor sites weren't even known in those days.
Yeah.
But Dr. Lemon proposed, and it was really Dr. Wright who brought this out, was be sure to include estriol because there's more estriol in a young woman's body than there is estradiol. He didn't know why, he just was observing that that was the healthy state. So copy nature. So we always recommend bias.
Mm. That was my question because I heard you on a round table with
Yeah.
Dr. Bergson and Dr. Gertz, and you were all talking, and you had brought this up, and I went, oh, so that means the higher the levels of estriol, the more protected a woman is because
Lot of causes. Yeah,
younger women who generally don't experience breast cancer and whatnot, they have higher levels of estriol compared to estradiol.
they do. Now, cancer has many causes,
Mm.
and you're into health and you can rattle off many causes. So we don't want to make it as simple as it's the hormones. The thing is, hormones don't cause cancer. And maybe you want me to address that misconception in this podcast about the risk of being treated with hormones, or maybe your audience is already beyond that.
No, no, that's definitely something I would love to discuss maybe on another podcast if you're open to it, because I actually have some other guests coming on to speak about cancer. So I do want, this is something I want to cover. But right now, because I'm watching the clock and I still want to milk your brain, for lack of a better word. So one thing here, just to be sure, because generally if I'm using estrogen with clients, I'm using estriol. But can you convert estriol to estradiol? Would
No,
do some bodies do that?
no.
Why would some women react negatively to estriol then in regards to breaking out with a yeast infection or any skin issues? According to Carol, there is already an underlying yeast issue there.
Well, yes, and but it's not from the estriol. I mean, I've never had that experience. I've only treated with Biest since 1993. I've never just treated with pure estradiol. Estradiol does a lot of good. Estradiol is very important, but estriol is important too. And if someone breaks out in yeast, well, that's a different story. They're not breaking out because of the estradiol.
Where does pregnenolone come into this in regards to the estrogen topic? If a woman uses pregnenolone in the hopes that it's going to help with sleep and calmness, the allopregnenolone for the brain, can, depending on that woman's genetic expressions, can that pregnenolone just be shunted purely down the estrogen pathways and she can then experience the estrogen symptoms from using pregnenolone?
Theoretically, but in practice, I never found it happening. Now, I like pregnenolone, but for other reasons. But really, what you're talking about is the biochemistry.
Mm.
So, for example, cholesterol is converted to pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is converted to progesterone. So, why not just feed a woman cholesterol? Well, it doesn't work. She's not going to get estrogen out of you giving her butter. I say, why don't you just give people butter? There's a lot of cholesterol in that. So the next question is, how about giving her pregnenolone? Well, we have no control about how her body's going to handle that because she can shunt it down many different pathways. So years ago, and under mentorship as well, I said, I'm better off getting very specific about it. Now, your pregnenolone can be very useful as an adjunct, and there might be a woman or two that you just give her pregnenolone, and her body will take that and produce the right amount of progesterone, right amount of DHEA, right amount of testosterone, right amount of estradiol. But I didn't want to rely on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to get very specific about it.
Hmm. Yeah. Reason I ask, again, selfish question. I decided to try pregnenolone and be my own guinea pig. It did wonders for my sleep. Amazing sleeps. And I don't sleep bad already. So they were just incredible sleeps.
Well, that's beautiful, and it's a testimony to the one of the values of pregnenolone.
Except
And we treat, yeah, what?
except the following days, all of the following days, I did it for 2 to 3 weeks consistently. The following days, I couldn't catch up with myself. I was exhausted. My cravings started going through the roof. Then all of a sudden, post ovulation, I started getting very swollen, very inflamed, tender breasts. I never get that unless I'm pregnant, and I'm not pregnant. I never ever get that. And then my period arrived 5 days early as well, which never happens. So
So the pregnenolone also went down the estrogen
that's what
pathway.
I'm thinking. It just, I
Yeah, but
can't
we don't have
convert it.
control over it, and that's why I don't like it for that purpose.
Mm.
Women who are having cognitive issues will add pregnenolone for very specific reasons. There's medical studies that shows that that can be effective
Mm.
for helping women who are losing cognitive function, but only as an adjunct for that. But yeah, that's why we have no control over it.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because my sleeps were great, but I'm not going to use it again. I'll just stick with the progesterone. But it's interesting because I know I have estrogen dominance, but I don't have primary symptoms. But my sister, she has endometriosis and everything. And it's interesting how different women, even familial, like sisters, mothers, will present differently and even metabolize differently.
And then there's the stress factor. Um, we recruit adrenaline and cortisol primarily for fight or flight, but we also recruit estrogen.
Yeah.
So some women who get into hyperestrogen states are not functioning well with the stress that they have. So they're recruiting extra estrogen. So they get estrogen dominance and they produce things like endometriosis and
That would make sense.
PMS. And
So we're coming up on time now. What are, well, we're in estrogen as it is. What's your opinion on the whole estrogen kickback topic that women speak of when they're using lower doses of progesterone?
well, Carol's the champion of this.
No.
And it relates to this. Progesterone has many effects. And one of the effects it has is it enhances the function of thyroid hormone. Can you believe that?
Mm.
Progesterone facilitates the function of thyroid hormone in its own receptor sites.
Yeah.
This is so profound that a woman can tell whether or not she ovulates by taking her temperature every day.
Yeah.
Well, why does her temperature rise if she ovulates?
The progesterone.
Because mid-cycle, if she ovulates, and only if she ovulates, she gets this blast of progesterone that facilitates the function of thyroid hormone, which energizes metabolism. Look at this. I'm screwing my camera here. That facilitates the action of thyroid hormone. Hello.
Here we go.
No, let's see.
That's it.
So metabolism increases, so she gets warmer. She produces more energy and more heat. Well, progesterone often also facilitates the action of estrogen in estrogen receptor sites. And so at low doses, progesterone, that effect of progesterone can predominate. And you can get breast tenderness from low doses of progesterone because it facilitates the action of estrogen, which stimulates breast glandular tissue in estrogen receptor sites. But at adequate doses, and that's what Carol encourages so brilliantly, don't be intimidated by that. Increase the dose.
Yeah.
You know,
So just use
for many
more.
women, you got to individualize this. You're in the territory of professional guidance here. This is where the big knowledge and the big experience really pays off to be
Yeah.
able to understand and balance all these different factors.
It can be quite complicated and hence why it's so scary for people.
But
So
I'd like it to not be scary because this is 2025. There is so much known. And this is the job of women, to find a provider that knows what they're doing and is specializing in this. And it's not scary for them. For one thing, we know that women who are on hormones are less risk for breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke than women who are not treated with hormones. And for another thing, it's pure entertainment to individualize these different hormones for women and get it right.
yeah. Yeah.
So it might be scary, but it ought not to be. This is a time in history when so much is known and so much good can be done. I have another commitment.
Yes. This has been fantastic, and I'm going to have you back on because we got to discuss cancer and hormones.
Very good.
So I'll be in touch with your team, but thank you for your
Good.
time. This has been incredible, and we'll have you back for a part two soon.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosensweet. Thank you.
Bye bye.